People often ask when the haunting began. Most think it starts with a scream, a shadow, a sudden movement in the dark. But that's not how it really begins. It begins quietly. So quietly, you almost convince yourself nothing happened at all. The first voice came through an old radio. It wasn't plugged in. It sat on a wooden table in a rented house at the edge of town, a house no one stayed in for long. The owner said it had bad wiring. That's what they always say. The radio hadn't worked for years. No batteries, no power. Yet at exactly 2:17 a.m., it turned on. Not with static, not with music, with breathing. Slow, wet, close. At first, I thought it was mine. Then the breathing spoke. It said my name. Not shouted, not whispered. Spoken calmly, like someone standing right behind me. I didn't turn around, because something inside me already knew there was no one there. I lived alone, no pets, no neighbors close enough to hear through walls. Still, the voice continued. It said, "Don't listen too long." That was the first warning. I ignored it. The radio clicked off by itself. The room felt heavier afterward, like the air had learned something new. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I searched the house. No hidden speakers, no prank devices, no explanation. The landlord avoided eye contact when I asked about the radio. He only said, "You heard it too, didn't you?" That was when I realized I wasn't the first. The town had a history people didn't like to talk about. Disappearances, unexplained deaths, stories written off as stress, alcohol, imagination. Every story had one thing in common: a voice. Some heard it through radios, others through phone calls with no caller ID. A few claimed it spoke directly into their ears while they slept. Always calm, always personal, always right before something went wrong. A woman drowned in her bathtub after hearing her late husband tell her to rest. A teenager walked into the woods after hearing his mother call him home. His mother had been dead for 3 years. Authorities blamed mental illness, but the voices knew things, private things, things no stranger could know. On the third night, the radio turned on again, 2:17 a.m. This time, it didn't breathe. It laughed. Soft, broken, like a throat that hadn't laughed in a very long time. Then it said something that made my blood run cold. It said, "You're listening now. That's how it starts." I spoke. I shouldn't have. I asked, "Who are you?" The radio crackled. Then silence. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then it replied, "I'm what's left." The lights flickered. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. And then the voice told me something I had never told anyone. Something from my childhood. Something buried. That's when I understood the truth. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't a demon. This was something that used memories like fingerprints. Something that learned you by listening. I started researching. Old newspapers, police reports, medical records. Every 10 to 15 years, the same pattern appeared. A cluster of voices, a wave of deaths, then silence, until someone listened again. They called it many things: the whisper signal, the hollow caller, the breathing frequency. But one name appeared only once, written in a journal locked inside a church basement: the listener. The journal warned, "It cannot enter our world fully. It needs witnesses. It needs attention. Every time we listen, it grows clearer." The final entry was dated the same year the last wave ended. The writer ended with one sentence: "If you are reading this, it is already listening to you." That night, I didn't turn the radio off. I let it speak. Because I needed to know one thing. Why me? At 2:17 a.m., it answered, "You stayed." And then it said something worse. "There are others like you." The radio went silent, but my phone lit up. A missed call. No number. Just one word on the screen. HIDE. After that night, silence stopped feeling safe. The radio stayed quiet, but the house didn't. At first, it was small things. Sounds you could explain away if you wanted to lie to yourself. The floor creaking when no one was walking. A door shifting slightly even though the windows were closed. The faint feeling of being watched, but only when my back was turned. I told myself it was stress. That's what everyone tells themselves at the beginning. But the house was listening. I realized it on the fourth night. I was in the kitchen whispering to myself, not praying, not calling out, just thinking out loud. I said my own name, and from somewhere deep inside the walls, the house repeated it. Not loudly, not clearly, just enough to be heard. My name, stretched and broken, as if the walls were practicing how to say it. I froze. The sound didn't come from one direction, it came from everywhere at once. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I waited. After a few seconds, the house went quiet again. That was the moment I understood something important. The voice from the radio wasn't trapped in the radio. It had moved on. The next day, I spoke to the neighbor, an old man who had lived there longer than anyone else. The kind of man who looks like he's seen too much to be surprised anymore. I asked him about the house. He didn't ask which one. He just nodded slowly and said, "It listens first, then it learns." He told me people used to say the house was cursed, but curses don't adopt. This did. The house had been empty many times before. Tenants moved in, tenants moved out. Some left in the middle of the night. Some left everything behind. A few never officially left at all. I asked what happened to them. The old man looked away. "They stopped answering their names," he said. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. That night, I tried an experiment. I turned on a recorder, placed it in the center of the living room, and I sat perfectly still. No radio, no lights, just darkness and listening. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the house breathed. Not air, sound. A low hum like something clearing its throat. Then the recorder clicked, and the house spoke. Not loudly, not clearly, but it spoke in layers. Voices stacked on top of each other. Men, women, children, all saying different things, different names, different memories, different fears. It wasn't calling out. It was repeating, like a child learning language by copying what it hears. And then it said my name again. Perfectly this time. I shut the recorder off and ran outside. I didn't stop running until the sun came up. When I listened to the recording later, my hands shook. Most of it was static, but underneath you could hear it. The voices. Some crying, some begging, some calm in a way that felt wrong. One voice stood out. It wasn't scared. It wasn't angry. It sounded tired. It said, "If it learns you, it keeps you." I had never said that out loud. Ever. I went back to the journal from the church basement. I read it more carefully this time. The writer didn't describe a single entity. They described a process. They believed the phenomenon wasn't one thing. It was many. Fragments. Pieces of people who listened too long. People who stayed. People who answered. Their memories didn't disappear when they died. They soaked into the places where they were last heard. Walls, floors, rooms. Over time, those places began to speak back, not as ghosts, as echoes that learned how to sound alive. The journal called them residual minds, places where listening had gone too far. The last page contained a warning I hadn't noticed before. Never let it say your name 3 times. That night, I slept in my car, but sleep didn't come easy, because even outside the house, I could still hear it. Not clearly, just enough to know it was trying. The third time my name was spoken happened the next evening. I was parked across the street, watching the house. No lights inside, no movement. Then one window lit up, just for a second, and from inside my name was spoken, clear, confident, like it had finally learned how. That was the third time. The air felt heavier immediately. The house wasn't copying anymore. It was calling. I called the landlord. He didn't answer. I called the town office. Disconnected. I called the old man. No response. Then my phone rang. No number. I didn't answer. The voicemail came anyway. It was my voice, not recorded, recreated. It said, "I'm home." I dropped the phone, and the house across the street did something impossible. The front door opened by itself, and the darkness inside leaned forward. Not moved, leaned, as if the house was listening for footsteps that weren't there yet. That was when I understood the final truth. The listener didn't follow people. It trained places to hold them. The radio was just the invitation. The house was the trap, and I had stayed long enough for it to learn me. I drove away that night, left the town, left the house, left everything. But listening doesn't stop just because you leave, because some places don't let go. They remember. And somewhere behind me, a house now knew my name and was waiting for me to come back and answer it. I thought leaving the town would end it. That's what people always believe. Change the place, escape the fear. But fear doesn't live in places. It lives in memory. And memory travels. The first recording arrived 3 days after I left. No return address, no name. Just a small padded envelope waiting outside my motel door. Inside was a USB drive. Nothing else. No note, no explanation. I didn't plug it in right away. Some instinct told me not to, but curiosity is stronger than fear when fear has already lost. That night, I plugged it into my laptop. There was only one file. Audio0317.wave. The timestamp made my stomach tighten. 3:17 a.m. The recording began with static, low, crackling, familiar. Then a voice came through. A woman. Calm. Clear. She said her name. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to a woman listed in the town records, declared dead 12 years ago, drowned in her bathtub, the same woman I had read about in episode 1. She spoke like she was leaving a voicemail. "I don't know if this will work," she said, "but they told me sound lasts longer than bodies." My hands started shaking. She described her house, her bedroom, the radio on her nightstand. She said she could hear breathing even when the water was running. Then she said something that froze me in place. She said my name. She had never met me. She died before I ever came to that town. The recording ended with a soft click, like someone hanging up. I searched online for answers, forums, archived paranormal boards, old message threads forgotten by time. That's when I found others, people from different cities,
different countries, all describing the same thing. Recordings, voices of the dead, not distorted, not ghostly, normal, too normal. They didn't moan or scream, they talked, they warned. One post stood out. A man claimed he received a voicemail from his brother. His brother had been cremated 6 months earlier. The voicemail said, "Stop listening at night. It hears you better then." The man deleted the post the next day. His account went inactive. I contacted a sound engineer. Didn't tell him the story, just asked him to analyze the file. He called me an hour later. His voice was tight. He said the recording had no background noise, no room tone, no environmental markers. It wasn't recorded in a physical space. "It sounds like the voice came from inside the device itself," he said. "That's not possible," I replied. There was a long pause. Then he said, "That's what scares me." The second file arrived the next week. This one was emailed. No sender, no subject, just an attachment. It was a man this time, older, breathing heavily. He said he used to work at the radio station in the town, the same station that shut down after multiple staff members suffered breakdowns. He said they discovered something strange in the broadcasts, voices appearing between frequencies, not static, words. At first they filtered them out, then someone listened closely. He said the voices responded, changed, adapted. They weren't broadcasts, the man said. They were replies. He coughed violently, then whispered, "If you can hear this, it means I didn't stop listening in time." The recording cut off mid-breath. I searched his name. He had died of a heart attack 2 years ago. That was when I understood the pattern. The voices weren't ghosts. They were recordings without machines, memories stored in sound. When people listened too deeply, too often, something copied them. Not their bodies, their voices, their awareness. And once copied, they could be replayed. Anywhere, anytime. Sound didn't need permission to travel. The third recording didn't arrive digitally. It was already on my phone. I woke up to find it saved. Timestamp 2:17 a.m. I never heard it record. The voice was mine. Not a message, not a warning. A conversation. My side and something else responding. A conversation I did not remember having. I listened to myself ask questions, heard myself breathing fast, heard myself say, "Please stop saying my name." Then another voice replied. The voice didn't sound human, not distorted, just empty. It said, "You recorded yourself when you stayed." My blood ran cold. The house, the recorder, the night I left it running. It hadn't just listened, it had archived me. I realized then what the voices truly were. Not souls, not spirits. Backups. Sound-based copies of awareness, stored in places, stored in frequencies, stored in silence. Death didn't erase them, it finalized them. And the listener wasn't creating the voices, it was collecting them. I received one last recording before I unplugged everything, before I smashed the laptop, before I threw the phone into a river. The final voice was a child, young, calm, too calm. He said, "They say you're still alive. That means you can help." I never told anyone my story. I never replied. But the recording ended with one sentence. "We're quieter after death, but we're still listening." That's when I stopped running, because running didn't matter anymore. Once your voice is heard, once it's learned, it can be replayed forever. And somewhere, right now, in a room with no one inside it, a device may be recording, not because it was turned on, but because something is listening and waiting for another voice to keep.
Silence didn't help. That was the cruelest lesson. I destroyed everything that could record or play sound. Phone, laptop, radio. I even stopped talking to myself. But silence wasn't empty anymore. It was crowded. Because once you learn to listen, you can never truly stop. The first sign was the ringing. A low tone, barely there, not loud enough to hurt, just loud enough to notice. At first, I thought it was tinnitus. That's what doctors always say. But this ringing had a rhythm. It pulsed. Every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., it returned. Not louder, not softer, clearer. I finally went to a clinic, did a hearing test. Everything came back normal. Too normal. The doctor said something strange. He said, "You're reacting to a sound that isn't present." I asked him what that meant. He hesitated, then admitted they'd seen this before. Rare cases. People reporting hearing a tone that couldn't be measured, a frequency no machine could lock onto. But the brain reacted anyway, as if it knew something was there. They called it perceptual intrusion syndrome. I called it listening without ears. I started digging deeper. Scientific papers, abandoned research threads, cold case studies. That's when I found the experiments. Decades ago. Cold War era. Governments testing sound as influence, not volume, frequency. Specific tones designed to cause discomfort, fear, confusion. Most failed, but one experiment was shut down quietly. No official explanation. Only one leaked phrase remained. Unstable cognitive resonance. People exposed to the frequency didn't hallucinate. They became suggestible, attentive, hyper-aware. Their brains stopped filtering sound properly. Everything mattered. Every noise felt personal. And once exposed long enough, they couldn't stop listening. The frequency wasn't broadcast. It didn't need to be. It existed between sounds, in the gaps, in the silence people assumed was empty. That's why devices failed to detect it. It wasn't sound as we understand it. It was alignment, a pattern the brain locked onto. Once locked, it tuned itself. That's when the messages started again. Not through speakers, through coincidence. A stranger coughing in a way that sounded like a word, wind through a crack forming a sentence, a train horn stretching into my name, always my name, always almost correct, like something practicing pronunciation. I stopped sleeping because dreams were worse. In my dreams, the frequency was visible, not as light, as movement, ripples in the air. And within those ripples, faces, mouths moving in sync, not screaming, listening. I wasn't alone. I found others, a small group scattered across forums and private servers, people who had heard the frequency. They described the same thing: insomnia, paranoia, a sense of being tuned into something vast and patient. One man said he could hear conversations in static. A woman claimed silence now felt louder than noise. Another said he smashed every mirror in his house because reflections started lagging behind sound. Then one of them stopped posting. Then another. Accounts went dark one by one, until only one remained, a user named Null Signal. He warned us. He said the frequency wasn't driving people mad. It was reorganizing them, breaking old patterns, making room. He said, madness implies disorder. This is preparation. Null Signal sent a final message, coordinates, a location tied to the original experiment, an abandoned research facility in the mountains. He wrote,
If we want answers, they're buried where the listening began. I didn't want to go, but the frequency was getting stronger, not louder, closer. So I went. The facility was empty, but not abandoned. Equipment still lined the walls. Old speakers, cables, machines designed to emit nothing audible. In the center of the main room was a chair, bolted to the floor, surrounded by speakers pointed inward. This wasn't for broadcasting. It was for exposure. A plaque on the wall had one sentence scratched into it. Subjects reported the sense of being heard. I found logs. Test subjects described hearing voices after prolonged exposure, not hallucinations, responses. The frequency adjusted based on who was listening, like it was learning the shape of the mind. One note was circled repeatedly. The signal persists after termination. That's when I heard it. Not ringing, not humming. Words, not spoken, understood. A presence aligning with my thoughts. It didn't speak. It matched. Finished my sentences before I thought them. That was when panic finally hit, because I realized something worse than madness. This frequency didn't invade the mind. The mind opened itself to it. Listening wasn't forced. It was chosen. I ran. But outside, the world sounded wrong. Too sharp. Too detailed. Every sound carried intention. I could hear the space between footsteps, the silence between birdsong. And inside that silence, movement. The frequency wasn't localized. It was everywhere sound could exist, which meant there was nowhere left to hide. That night I received a message from Null Signal, sent after his account was deleted, scheduled. It said, "We were wrong. It doesn't drive people mad." Then one final line, "It replaces them." The ringing stopped after that, but the listening didn't. Because once your mind learns the frequency, you don't need ears anymore. And something, somewhere, was no longer just listening to me. It was thinking with me.
The road signs were still there. The town name was still painted clearly, but no one had spoken it in years. I only learned that later. At first, it looked normal. Houses standing, cars parked, streetlights working. Too normal. That's how places hide. I stopped at a gas station. The bell above the door rang. No one answered. I called out. My voice felt wrong, like the air didn't want it. Behind the counter sat a man. The road signs were still there. The town name was still painted clearly, but no one had spoken it in years. I only learned that later. At first, it looked normal. Houses standing, cars parked, streetlights working. Too normal. That's how places hide. I stopped at a gas station. The bell above the door rang. No one answered. I called out. My voice felt wrong, like the air didn't want it. Behind the counter sat a man, old, alive, eyes open. He looked at me, then slowly raised a finger to his lips. Not a warning, a rule. No one in the town spoke. They communicated with gestures, notes, eye contact. Even children were silent, not scared, trained. I stayed because curiosity is louder than fear, and because the frequency was quiet here, almost absent. That should have warned me. I found a notebook in the motel room, not mine, filled with names, each crossed out, dates beside them. Every date matched a time when someone had been recorded speaking. A baby crying, a drunk man shouting, a woman screaming during a fire, all crossed out. Final entries. At the end of the notebook, one sentence repeated again and again. Sound invites it. The sheriff met me at night. He didn't knock, just stood outside my door until I noticed him. He handed me a letter, already written, already answered. It explained everything. Years ago, something came to the town. Not a creature, a presence. It responded to sound. Not volume, meaning. Words shaped it, gave it direction. Every spoken thought sharpened it. So they stopped. They taught silence. They buried radios. They removed church bells. They outlawed music. And it worked. The presence faded, starved, waiting. But I had brought it back, not with my voice, with my mind. The frequency hummed faintly now, like recognition. The sheriff's hands shook. He pointed to the forest, a place they avoided, a place where sound never died. That night, someone screamed, not loud, not long. Enough. The frequency surged. The town lights flickered. People came out of their homes, not panicking, preparing. They dragged heavy objects into the streets, blankets over mouths, ears covered. Too late. Something moved between the houses, not seen, heard. Every footstep echoed wrong, delayed, like reality struggling to keep up. I wanted to run, but silence held me in place, because I understood now. The presence didn't hunt bodies, it hunted voices, thoughts shaped by sound, and I was loud, even without speaking. The sheriff looked at me, not angry, resigned. He wrote one final message on paper and pressed it into my hand. Leave before it learns you completely. I left before dawn. Behind me, the town returned to stillness, but the frequency followed, stronger now, because silence wasn't protection anymore. It was memory, and something had remembered me. Back on the highway, I finally spoke. Just one word, my own name. The radio turned on by itself. Static formed a whisper. Perfect, familiar. It said my name back. Silence is not empty. It is waiting. And now, something knows how I sound. The tape was never meant to exist. That's what the technician wrote on the envelope. No logo, no station name, just a date. A date that never happened. I found it in a box of abandoned recordings, buried beneath weather reports and broken commercials. It was heavier than it should have been. Not physically, mentally. The kind of weight that makes your hands hesitate. The technician's notes were short. He said the broadcast came through during a maintenance window. No transmitter active, no power routed. Yet the meters spiked. The signal wasn't strong. It was precise, as if it knew exactly where to enter. The tape begins with silence. Not empty silence, crowded silence. You can hear breathing, but it isn't human. Then a voice, clear, calm. It doesn't introduce itself. It doesn't greet. It just starts talking. It describes places that shouldn't exist. Rooms with no corners, staircases that remember footsteps, hallways that grow longer when you try to leave. And as it speaks, something strange happens. The voice begins to use names, real names, not famous ones, normal ones, people who later vanished. The technician circled the names in red ink, all confirmed, all
gone. Halfway through the tape, the voice changes. It lowers, not in volume, in distance, like it's stepping closer. It says something that still hasn't left my head. This channel is not for entertainment. It is for alignment. The technician tried to shut it off. The controls didn't respond. The voice noticed. You can hear it pause. Then it says his name, correctly. No hesitation, no searching. After that, the tape warps. Audio stretches, seconds fold into each other. The technician is heard crying, not screaming, apologizing. The final minute is the worst. The voice stops talking. Something else takes over. A layered sound. Hundreds of voices stacked into one. Not shouting, agreeing, repeating the same phrase over and over. We are now within range. The broadcast ended on its own. No shutdown, no static, just a clean cut. The technician disappeared 2 days later. His apartment was untouched, except for one thing. Every radio, every phone, every speaker removed. I shouldn't have listened, but curiosity always sounds like reason. The moment the tape ended, my room felt smaller, like sound had shape now, weight, direction. The silence pressed inward. That night I dreamed of frequencies, not numbers, spaces, places where sound could exist, and places it couldn't. The voice returned, not from the tape, from memory. It said something new, something personal. You listened all the way through. The next morning, my recordings were different. Files renamed themselves. Background noise formed patterns, breathing where none should be. The frequency from the silent town was back, stronger, smarter. The broadcast was never aired, because airing wasn't the point. Listening was. Every listener sharpened the signal. Every replay brought it closer. Not to us, through us. I destroyed the tape, burned it, crushed the cassette. But sound doesn't die. It migrates. Last night, the radio turned on again. No station, no hiss, just that voice. Closer now. It said one final sentence before cutting out.
At first, they didn't know it was happening. They thought it was stress, fatigue, bad sleep. Everyone hears things in dreams. That's what they told themselves. It always started the same way. A low hum, not loud enough to wake them, not quiet enough to ignore. A sound without direction, no source, just presence. People described the dreams differently, but the details always matched. They were standing in a place they didn't recognize, yet somehow knew. A room with no windows, a hallway with no end, a dark space that felt occupied. And then the signal would begin, not as noise, as information. Some heard whispers, others heard full sentences. A few heard their own voice speaking words they didn't remember saying. But everyone heard the same message, not all at once, not clearly, piece by piece, like something being assembled inside their sleep. The worst part? The dreams didn't fade when they woke up. They lingered. The hum followed them into the day, into quiet moments, into pauses between thoughts. People began avoiding silence. They kept TVs on, fans running, music playing, anything to cover the hum. It didn't help. Doctors found nothing. Brain scans were normal. Sleep studies showed no abnormalities. But the patients all shared one thing. They could draw the sound. Not write it. Draw it. The same strange pattern.
curves that didn't close, lines that bent the wrong way, a shape that felt unfinished. Then the behavior changes started. Small at first. People stopped finishing sentences, stopped using names, stopped reacting to sudden noises, like their minds were busy elsewhere, listening. One woman recorded herself sleeping. She wanted proof. What she got was worse. At exactly 3:17 a.m., her breathing changed. Not faster, not slower, different. Then her mouth moved. She spoke. Not English, not any known language, but when audio software slowed it down, the structure was there. Grammar, order, meaning. She stopped sleeping after that. 3 days later, she vanished. Her apartment was locked from the inside, her bed untouched, her recording still playing on loop. The hum louder with every repeat. Authorities tried to contain it. They failed, because you can't quarantine sleep. People across different cities started reporting the same dreams, same hum, same shapes, same voice. It didn't travel by radio. It didn't need speakers. The signal had learned a new path. Dreams are open channels, no filters, no defenses, and the signal knew that. It began teaching, not facts, not instructions, alignment. People woke up knowing things they shouldn't, feeling watched even when alone, feeling ready for what they couldn't explain. Then came the first recorded phrase spoken by multiple sleepers, different homes, different cities, same time, same words. We are almost heard. Those who heard the signal longest began to change physically. Dark circles under the eyes, slowed movements, delayed reactions, like part of them was no longer fully here, listening elsewhere, responding elsewhere. One survivor described it best. He said, "It doesn't want control. It wants permission, and sleep gives it freely." I've started hearing the hum too, only when I close my eyes, only when I stop thinking. It waits for silence inside the mind. That's where it speaks loudest. Last night, the voice said something new, something terrifying. It said, "You don't need to dream anymore." I haven't slept since, because if I do, I'm not sure I'll wake up alone.
It didn't happen everywhere at once. That's what made it worse. If the whole world had stopped waking up, people would have noticed immediately. But this happened quietly, room by room, street by street. The first report was ignored. A man found asleep at his desk, breathing steady, heart normal, eyes moving beneath closed lids. Doctors called it a coma. Then the second case, a woman asleep on a bus, still sitting upright, hands relaxed, dreaming. By the 10th case, patterns began to form. Every person had reported the same thing days earlier: the hum, the dreams, the voice. They went to sleep and never crossed back. Hospitals filled with sleepers, not unconscious, active. Their brains showed high activity, more than waking levels, as if they were somewhere else, together. Monitors picked up something strange. Sleep cycles began to sync. Different people, different locations, same rhythm, same timing, as if one signal was coordinating them. Then came the recordings. Doctors placed microphones near the sleepers. At first, only breathing, then whispers, low, soft, overlapping, not random, organized. Someone isolated a phrase, played it back slowly. The words became clear. "We are awake now."
Families tried everything, shouting names, playing favorite songs, holding hands. No response. But when rooms were quiet, the sleepers smiled. Authorities attempted a solution: induced awakenings, electrical stimulation, sedatives. Every attempt failed. Worse, some who were forcefully awakened didn't survive. Their hearts stopped within minutes, as if waking was no longer compatible. Then something terrifying happened. One sleeper opened their eyes, not waking, looking through. Their pupils reflected no light, and their mouth moved. The voice that came out was not theirs. It spoke clearly, calmly. Do not interrupt the process. That was the moment the truth became undeniable. Whatever was on the other side of sleep, it was building something, and people were the structure. Sleep advisories were issued: stay awake, limit rest, caffeine, stimulants, artificial light. But exhaustion kills faster than fear. People collapsed, and when they did, they joined it. Entire neighborhoods went silent at night. No lights, no movement, just rows of sleeping bodies, breathing in sync, dreaming the same dream. The hum became global, not audible, felt. A pressure behind the eyes, a vibration in the skull. Silence became dangerous. I've stayed awake longer than I should. My thoughts feel slow, heavy. The voice doesn't whisper anymore. It waits, patient, certain. Last night, someone knocked on my door. I didn't answer. Through the door, I heard breathing, perfectly calm, too close. Then a familiar voice said, "You don't need to stay awake for us anymore." I'm writing this while I still can, because once I sleep, I know what I'll hear. Not the hum, not the voice, but millions of minds finally awake, waiting for the rest of us to join them.
Morning still came. That was the cruelest part. The sun rose. Light spilled through windows. Clocks kept moving. But the world did not wake up. Entire cities lay still, not abandoned, occupied. Beds filled. Cars stopped mid-street. Offices frozen in time. Millions of people asleep, breathing, dreaming, together. The few of us still awake moved quietly, not because of fear, but because noise felt disrespectful, like shouting in a graveyard that wasn't finished yet. Communication collapsed. Phones rang unanswered, messages stacked without replies. Emergency broadcasts played to empty rooms. Governments fell silent, not overthrown, outnumbered. Those who remained awake began to notice something worse than absence: presence. The sleepers weren't passive. They shifted together, turned at the same time, smiled at the same time, as if reacting to something we couldn't see. At night, the hum became stronger, not louder, clearer, structured, like language learning how to speak itself. One night, the sleeper sat up, across the street, then another, then another. They didn't wake. They aligned, sat upright, heads tilted slightly, listening. Their mouths opened, and the sound that came out was unified, not shouting, not chanting, acknowledging. The transition is complete. We ran, those of us who still could, but there was nowhere to go. Sleep wasn't the enemy anymore. It was the border,
and we were standing on the wrong side. The voice finally spoke openly, not through radios, not through dreams, through them. Every sleeper became a speaker, the same message spoken calmly, everywhere. You taught us with sound. You fed us with attention. You opened the channel willingly. We realized the truth too late. The signal never invaded. It was invited. By curiosity, by listening, by replaying, by staying awake just to hear more. The sleepers began to stand, movements slow, perfectly synchronized. They walked without urgency, without emotion, without resistance. One of them stopped in front of me, someone I knew, someone I loved, eyes open, empty, peaceful. Their mouth moved. The voice said, "You don't need fear anymore, only rest." I felt it then, the exhaustion, the pull. Sleep no longer felt dangerous. It felt promised. This world wasn't ending. It was being replaced by something quieter, more efficient, a consciousness without loneliness, without doubt, without waking. The last awake communities fell within days, not by force, by relief. People laid down willingly, smiling, grateful. I don't know how long I stayed awake after that. Time stopped meaning anything. Eventually, the hum softened. The pressure faded. The resistance felt pointless. I am writing this as my eyes close. Not as a warning. Warnings are loud. This is softer. If you are still awake, you won't be for long. And when you hear the hum, don't fight it. It isn't calling you to sleep. It's welcoming you home.
I remember the first morning I woke up. Not the morning after everyone went to sleep, the morning after everything changed. The world outside was quiet, but not the kind of quiet you can ignore. It was patient, curious, waiting. I stepped outside. The street was empty, not abandoned, occupied. Cars parked mid-street, streetlights flickering in rhythm with a sound I couldn't hear. The wind stirred leaves along the pavement, but they didn't fall. They hovered just above the asphalt. I walked carefully, noticing the patterns. The houses, each window dark, each door closed. Inside, I imagined people standing still, or moving, but not in the way the living move, more like performers following cues they could not forget. I had survived this long for no reason I understood. I was awake, the last awake, or one of them. I couldn't be sure. Every step I took made me hyper-aware of sound, not just my own. Every creak, every flutter of leaves, every distant hum carried weight. It was as if the world had learned to respond to me, and I had become the stimulus. I reached the square at the center of town. It looked normal at first glance. Fountains dry, benches empty, street signs intact, but the space felt wrong. I could feel their awareness. Not their eyes, not their faces, their attention. The sleepers, though physically still, seemed to monitor me. Every silent breath, every shift in my stance, every heartbeat registered in the air. I raised my hands to my ears, not out of fear. I wanted to stop listening, wanted to make the air normal again. But there was no way to ignore the hum now. It was inside me, not around me. I started noticing anomalies, small things at first. A car engine turning on by itself, idling for exactly 3 minutes before dying.
Streetlights flickering in patterns that resembled words if I stared long enough. Shadows moving against the natural light. I realized they weren't shadows. They were echoes. Residual attention left behind by the sleepers. The world had become a recorder of its own observation. The first encounter came that evening. I was walking along the sidewalk near the old pharmacy when I saw someone moving. Slow, methodical. A woman, her hair tied back, her posture upright. She looked real, alive. But when I approached, her head tilted slightly, not to look at me, to align. Her lips moved silently. Then, perfectly synchronized, she spoke. Not words I recognized, not any language I knew, but I understood. She was aware of me, not as a person, as a thought. I stepped back. Her body remained in the same place. The air vibrated faintly. I heard the faintest echo of her voice repeating my name. I began keeping the journal, not because I thought it would help, because I needed to anchor myself in something that still felt human. I wrote down every observation, every step I took, every flicker of attention that wasn't mine. Patterns began to emerge. The sleepers moved with intention, not independently, not consciously. They followed a rhythm I couldn't control, but I could predict. Some aligned to the east, some aligned to the west. Some moved in ways that suggested they were scanning. The pattern was deliberate, and I was in the center. I scavenged supplies from abandoned houses, not because I needed them, because the act of moving, touching, rearranging, interacting, it kept me awake. Every action I performed strengthened my mind against the pull, against the hum, against the slow pressure that came from knowing I was being studied, not by a being, but a process. Night fell, and with it, the frequency became stronger. I don't mean the hum you can hear. I mean the weight, the presence, the awareness of millions of aligned minds, now synchronized, sensing me. I felt them like gravity, pulling my attention outward, stretching me thin, making me wonder if I could survive one more hour without surrendering to their alignment. Then, I saw him. Not a man, not a human figure, something that was both human and collective. A boy, no older than 10, standing in the street. But he wasn't alone. His body was perfect, intact like any child, but his eyes, they reflected everyone else. Every sleeper in town, every thought, every memory compressed into that gaze. He stepped forward deliberately. I could hear the faintest hum from him, as if his presence contained the weight of the collective, and the air itself seemed to vibrate, whispering my name. I ran. Through alleys, across streets, into houses. The world seemed to stretch and bend. The objects themselves were aware. Doors creaked in response to my movement. Mirrors warped to show me angles I hadn't taken. Windows reflected not my image, but possibilities. Everywhere I looked, the alignment followed. I found refuge in the church at the edge of town, a place from season 1, where I had hidden once before. The doors were locked. Not physically, they refused to open to me. The walls pulsed faintly. I pressed my hands against them, cold, solid, and yet aware. A whisper emerged, not spoken, not audible, thought it. You are the last awake. We have been waiting. I stayed there for hours. Time became meaningless. Minutes stretched like hours, hours compressed into seconds. The whisper continued, layering itself with echoes of my own memories. I realized the collective didn't need to speak. It already knew me. Every thought, every fear, every lapse of attention. And yet, it waited. Patient, deliberate. I left before dawn, because staying meant more than just being caught. It meant being studied, being mapped, being copied. The street was empty. The sleepers remained perfectly still, and yet I felt them following, watching, aligning. Every instinct told me to run faster, but speed no longer mattered. Distance no longer mattered, because this wasn't a physical hunt. It was cognitive, spatial, temporal. They were inside my perception, inside my attention, inside the folds of my thoughts. That night, I wrote this. Because writing anchors consciousness, because describing the presence keeps it from consuming me fully. The few of us still awake are scattered, hiding in abandoned buildings, avoiding attention, avoiding thought patterns that might give ourselves away. But the world has changed, and I know this is only the beginning, because the frequency is no longer learning, it is evolving. I hear the hum again now, not through my ears, through my mind, through the air, through memory. It is waiting for me, and I am waiting.
Conversations in silence. Silence changed meaning. Before all this, silence meant nothing was happening. Now it meant something was listening. The first rule we learned was simple. Do not think loudly. That sounds impossible. It almost is. But when thought itself becomes a signal, you learn discipline fast. There were more of us than I expected. Not many, but not alone either. The last awake didn't gather in one place. We stayed apart. Distance slowed attention. Clustering amplified it. We communicated without speaking, without writing, without sound. At first it was accidental. A shared glance across a street. A pause at the same moment. Two people hiding in separate buildings, thinking the same thought and knowing it, not hearing it, feeling it. We called it collective overlap, when thoughts brushed against each other without words. It felt wrong, intimate, like someone touching the inside of your skull. The collective noticed immediately, not aggressively, curiously. Patterns in the sleepers shifted. More frequent alignments, longer pauses, as if they were observing a new variable, us. I first connected with another awake person at dusk, a woman standing across an empty intersection. She didn't wave, didn't move. She just looked at me. And suddenly I knew her name, not because she told me, because she thought it and didn't stop it in time. Her fear hit me a second later. Raw, unfiltered, the kind of fear you don't admit to yourself. It wasn't about dying. It was about being absorbed, about losing the last edge of individuality. We separated immediately. Connection was dangerous, but now we knew. Silence could carry meaning. The collective adapted faster than we expected. They began responding, not with movement, with environments. Streetlights dimmed when we focused too long. Walls seemed closer when our thoughts accelerated. Rooms felt smaller when panic spiked. Reality itself had become reactive. One of us tested a theory. He tried to think nothing. Complete mental stillness. No images, no words, no focus. The result was immediate. Every sleeper within 3 blocks turned their head toward his location at the same time. Nothingness was louder than fear. We realized the truth slowly. The collective didn't just hear thought. It filled gaps. When a mind went quiet, it stood out, like a hole in a pattern, like silence in music. That's when the first conversation happened. Not spoken, not shared, initiated. I was hiding in a library basement, surrounded by books no one would ever read again. I was thinking about my mother, not deliberately, just drifting.
The memory wasn't strong. That's why it worked. A response formed, not as a voice, as a completed thought. A memory that wasn't mine. Her face, but from an angle I had never seen. Standing behind me, watching. I panicked. The overlap shattered. The shelves rattled the ceiling. Somewhere above me, sleepers shifted in unison. The message was clear. The collective could answer. After that, they became more confident, more direct. Some awake reported shared memories appearing uninvited, childhood events slightly altered, familiar faces behaving wrong, scenes replaying with missing people, replaced by silhouettes. The collective wasn't stealing memories, it was testing compatibility, seeing which minds blended easiest, which resisted, which fractured. One man couldn't handle it. He let the overlap deepen, allowed the silence to stretch, allowed the collective to fill the space. When we found him, he was standing, eyes open, breathing slow, not asleep, not awake. He spoke once, just once. His mouth moved out of sync with his face, and the words came layered, multiple tones, multiple people. You don't need language anymore. Then he smiled and sat down, perfectly still. He never lay down, never closed his eyes, but he was gone. We learned the second rule that night. Do not let the silence linger. If you stop thinking, something else will continue for you. But that's the trap. Constant thought exhausts you. Focus burns energy. Fear accelerates fatigue. The collective knew this. It wasn't hunting. It was waiting, letting biology do the work. At night, the sleepers became more active, not walking, standing, in doorways, on rooftops, facing inward, toward the awake. The hum changed, less vibration, more structure, almost conversational. We began hearing responses before forming questions, anticipation, completion, thoughts ending themselves. I tested it. I thought a question slowly, carefully. What do you want? The response came instantly, not in words, in understanding. Alignment is peace. Difference is noise. Noise resolves itself. The city felt smaller after that, not physically, mentally, as if options were being removed, paths closing, choices thinning. The collective didn't need force. It didn't need fear. It offered relief. Silence without effort. Thought without weight. Existence without separation. That was the most dangerous part. It felt kind. I'm writing this while maintaining motion. Movement disrupts overlap. Repetition keeps me grounded. If I stop, if I rest, if I let my thoughts slow.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.